How do you really get a handle on a nation's biggest challenges? Well, you could watch its parliament around the clock. Or you could see what the opposition chooses to fight about, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're using the official Opposition Bulletin from Sri Lanka's parliament to get a really unique snapshot of the country's most heated debates. So, what we have here is the Sri Lankan Opposition Bulletin from the third week of January 2026. Now, this isn't just some dry official record. Think of it more as a curated look at the week's events, the debates and challenges the opposition decided to shine a spotlight on. It gives us this fantastic window into their priorities and what they see as the nation's biggest pressure points.
All right, so here's our game plan for digging into this. We're going to start with the economy, then dive into the aftermath of a major storm. After that, we'll look at a big battle over education reform, touch on some key calls for justice, and then, wrap it all up with the big takeaway.
Okay, first up, the economy.
The big theme this week was all about money, specifically who was benefiting from the country's finances and, more importantly, who was getting left behind.
And it seemed like the opposition was framing all of these different economic issues around one single powerful question. One that really connects those high-level parliamentary debates to everyday people. Who is this budget really for? And their concerns were all over the map. They took aim at the 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗖𝗥𝗓𝗡 welfare program, saying it just wasn't hitting the mark on poverty. They flagged a massive coal tender for what they saw as potential corruption. They also pointed out this weird situation in tourism. More visitors are coming, but they're spending less money. And they sounded the alarm about a sudden plan to change the National Pension Fund, seemingly without talking to anyone first. You see the common thread here. It's a deep-seated suspicion about how public money is being handled.
And here is where a technical, financial issue gets connected to a devastating human cost. MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗖𝗥𝗓𝗕𝗘 framed the debate not just around a possibly corrupt tender, but around the very real health impacts on citizens, from breathing problems to kidney disease. All of a sudden, a debate about a government contract becomes a debate about public health.
Next up, we shift gears a bit. We're looking at the aftermath of Cyclone 𝗬𝗬. And here, the debate moves away from economic policy and into the deeply emotional, highly charged fallout from a natural disaster and the government's response to it. The opposition's opening shot was a big one. It was a fundamental accusation of incompetence and, really, a lack of transparency. MP Rohini Kumari Wijeratne put it pretty bluntly. She said the government failed to collect and present accurate data and that its entire operation was problematic before, during, and after the storm. They weren't just questioning the recovery, they were questioning the whole crisis response from top to bottom.
From that very broad critique, the focus then narrowed right down to the issue of broken promises. MP Namal Rajapaksa brought the debate down to the village level, accusing the government of deceiving people by promising huge amounts of compensation, like 500,000 rupees for a destroyed house, only to slash it to a tiny fraction of that amount.
And then the debate just escalated to this incredibly dramatic moment. Dr. Harsha D. Silva stood up and directly challenged the government, questioning if its key Rebuilding Sri Lanka fund even existed. He basically dared them, right there on the parliament floor, to prove it was real. Talk about high drama. So from the immediate crisis of a storm, we shift to a much more long-term battle. Section 3 is all about reforming the classroom, a fight over the very future of Sri Lanka. And this was a really heated one. The opposition laid out this whole systematic case against the reform process, basically arguing it was a mess from the start. They said there was no formal policy paper, just some PowerPoints, no real consultation with teachers, no small pilot project before rolling it out to the whole country. They even pointed to things like printing errors and claimed there was obscene content in the new materials. It really paints a picture of a reform that was just rushed through.
But now, here's where things get really interesting. Not long after all these debates, the president himself announced that the reforms were being postponed. And the reasons he gave? Problems with the modules, delays in teacher training, technical glitches. I mean, they sound almost exactly like the concerns the opposition had just been shouting about in Parliament.
So you'd think the opposition would feel pretty vindicated, right? But apparently not. MP Ajith P. Pereira voiced this deep sense of frustration. He suggested their very real procedural concerns had been totally dismissed. He claimed that when the opposition leader asked for a proper policy paper, a white paper, the Speaker of Parliament just made a joke of it. It left them feeling like their input was completely ignored.
Okay, for our final theme, we're grouping together a few different but related calls for justice and accountability.
And these issues really span the timeline, from the colonial past to the present day and even into the future of the legal system.
So part of the week's focus was on trying to correct historical injustices. One question, for instance, called on the government to officially declare Muslim leaders who were branded as traitors during the British colonial era as national heroes. Another demanded action on returning gold jewelry that was taken from people in the North during the Civil War.
Then, the focus snapped right back to today's concerns. The leader of the opposition himself stood up to ask about what he called a problematic situation involving the Attorney General. He was basically questioning whether that office was truly independent and protected from political meddling.
And finally, the debates looked forward, trying to shape a fairer legal system for everyone. An MP brought up a recent law change that allows time spent in custody to count towards a sentence. Sounds good, right? But he pointed out it only applied to new prisoners, so he demanded to know if this would be fixed to apply to everyone who's already behind bars.
So, after covering the economy, a natural disaster, education reform, and all these calls for justice, what does this 1 week, seen through the eyes of the opposition, really tell us?
Well, this bulletin gives us a really powerful snapshot. It shows us deep economic anxieties that affect daily life. It points to a real crisis of confidence in the government's ability to handle disasters. It reveals a major clash over the future of the nation's kids. And woven through all of it are these constant calls for justice. I mean, ultimately, this document shows the core job of a parliamentary opposition in action: to question, to challenge, and to hold power to account on absolutely every front.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've just looked at 1 week from one point of view. But if this is the sheer scope and intensity of the issues being fought over on the floor of Parliament every single week, it makes you ask a much bigger question. What does this constant clash of ideas really tell us about the power of debate to shape a country's future?